Hi everyone, welcome to today's customer exclusive webinar, Core Server Administration. My name is Katie and I will be your host during today's webinar presented by Bethany Maddox. We're excited to help you maximize your server deployment, whether you purchased your server 10 days ago or 10 years ago. And from looking at the attendee list we have today, it looks like we have at least a few of you in both categories. Bethany serves Vitex customers primarily at the support desk at Customer Care Specialist. Between support cases, she manages the overall vision of customer care at Vitex, developing instructional screencasts on various core and Genesis topics and elements of software documentation. She has often served as host, writer, and technical manager of countless webinars throughout her tenure at Vitex. Before Bethany gets started, I do have a few housekeeping items. As with all of our Spotlight webinars, we're going to be taking questions through the Questions tab on your webinar control panel throughout, and as you think of them, just go ahead and type those in there and we'll have a comprehensive Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Our webinar is being recorded today, so if you experience connection problems during the live presentation, a recording will be available by request within 24 hours of the live version. To request access to the recording, get in touch with Vitex Customer Support via the email address support@viteccorp.com, and I will chat that out in just a moment. So I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Bethany. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Katie. I've been thinking about doing this webinar for quite some time. Every time I meet someone who has recently been assigned to be a core server administrator, I wish I had a recording of this webinar to send to them. I'm especially grateful for everyone attending today, as without a live audience, a webinar just isn't a webinar. So I hope you'll find this event useful and the recording as well. I'll be sure to email everyone a link to the recording as soon as it's available. That'll probably be Monday morning when that comes out to you, so keep an eye out for that. The material I've selected for you today is presented in the order in which a new server administrator may need to consider it. We'll start with installation options, including hardware selection, drive distribution, and considerations for off-site team members. We'll talk about a few firewall considerations, the various license methods and types, service packs, backups, and the variety of options available in administrative tools. And then we'll wrap that up with just a note on troubleshooting. A common theme you'll hear from me today will be pointing you to resources. We've put a lot into documenting as much as we can about the core server. So instead of going through each little detail of the documents, at times today I may instead point you to where you'll find the relevant document so that you can download and examine the document on your own. A song in my favorite musical says, "Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start." For core, the beginning is hardware selection. I wish I could say I have a hard and fast rule of the requirements for a core server machine. Because core server is used by small, medium, and large teams, the hardware needs can vary greatly. For a small team, one that is supporting up to 2 concurrent users, you'll find the hardware requirements to be minimal. In fact, the laptop I use to work on every day is robust enough to support such a small team. For medium teams of 3 to 10 users, we'll need to be a little more selective. At this stage, you'll want to have a server class machine. We recommend at least 2 physical hard drives. While virtual drives make sense for a variety of reasons, if we can distribute the core repository on a different physical drive than the operating system, you will realize performance improvements. If you have an older server on hand with 4 gigs of RAM, it will do. However, if you're making a new purchase, I would go with 8 gigs of RAM to future-proof your machine. Larger installations that will be supporting more than 10 concurrent users need to beef up just a little bit more. Consider at least 4 physical hard drives. You'll definitely want 8 gigs of RAM and a Windows Server operating system. Before installing your core server for such a large team, be sure to give our support team a call. There are some configuration options for a core server that are not part of the installation routine. And we can help you adjust these for the larger deployments, and we'll even prepare a custom configuration file for you that you can just drop in place. So again, just be sure to let us know if you're installing for 10 or more concurrent users, and our support team will take care of you. As we talked about hardware selection, I mentioned that multiple hard drives are recommended for medium and large deployments. Let's dive into that just a little bit. When you install the core server, you will be asked on which drive you would like to install each of the 4 folders that support the core server. These folders are Core 90 Server, Core 90 Repository, Core 90 Logs, and Core 90 Backups. The server folder is essentially the program directory. This is where you'll find all of the installation files, scripts, configuration, and other information that supports an application. The repository folder contains your production data. As new data is entered, it first goes to the logs folder, then the server reads it back into the repository, clearing out the logs folder as appropriate. It's important to note this folder is self-maintained. You don't need to do anything there. And then finally, the backups folder is where you'll find the backup files that are generated by running a hot backup against the core server. I'm sure you're very interested in backups, and we'll cover that in detail later today. Remember that for medium-sized installations, I recommended 2 physical drives. In this case, you'll put the operating system, server, logs, backup folders on one drive, and the repository folder on a second drive. For large installations, you would distribute these folders, especially repository and logs, on their own drives. In the best case scenario, you would have a total of 4 physical drives. The first would be the operating system and backups folder. Next, the server folder. After that, the repository folder goes on its own drive, and then the logs on its own drive. Note that the only one of the core folders I am linking up with anything else is that I'm putting backups on the same drive with the operating system, since backups are not a very intense or frequent operation for the core server. The final thing you'll need to consider before or during installation is how you will best serve off-site team members. How best to do this is a very individual choice. The core server can serve an off-site team member with no resources other than the core integrated desktop. However, most off-site team members find that the data transfer speeds are not fast enough for regular use. Speeding this up can be accomplished by essentially getting the user inside your LAN. There's a few ways to do this. If your team is small, or you don't want to invest in IT resources, you might consider using remote desktop. This is a solution that Vitech itself does employ. We have just 2 team members off-site that need to access our core server on a daily basis. These 2 team members use remote desktop to log into a computer in our office and run the core integrated desktop there. We like this solution because it's simple to deploy and has minimal cost. If you have more users that you'll need to serve off-site, you'll need to consider other options. While our support team does not officially support Citrix installations, we have several customers who use it. We know that a Citrix environment does work with the core server, and we are happy to share with you what we've learned about using core in a Citrix environment. Again, we don't officially support Citrix, but that's simply because we don't have it here. Therefore, we are not Citrix experts. We will rely on your Citrix experts for their knowledge of that environment and then provide core-specific information to help them get it started. When you have a lot of off-site team members to support that need to use the full core integrated desktop, this solution may make sense. There's another option for off-site team members that don't need a full core integrated desktop. This is Core2Net. Core2Net is a product we offer that is an add-on to your core server that is essentially a web server. It will allow users to log into your core server repository from a web browser. It's great for team members who are looking up information or doing lightweight engineering work. It's important to note this isn't a full client, rather what I would call a lightweight client. If you would like more information about Core2Net, please let me know. I can have a member of our sales team give you a call and discuss if it meets your needs. As soon as we start talking about data transfer and off-site team members, we will need to consider your firewall. We fully documented all of the information you'll need to configure your firewall to support Core. Rather than outline each and every port number and executable on this webinar, I'll instead point you to the resource. The document you are looking for is called Core on a WAN. If you've already installed the Core server, you'll find it under the Start menu. Click Start, All Programs, Core 9.0 Server, Documentation, then Core on a WAN. We fully documented all of the ports, the directionality, and the types. You can get a copy of this document over to your network team, and then they'll have everything they need to know to open the firewall as appropriate. As the server administrator, you may not have been included in conversations that helped the purchaser determine what types of license to purchase. It's still important that you know what types of licenses your team has so that you can provide support to your organization. First, there are two things you need to license. The Core integrated desktop needs a license to run. We'll call this the client license. A client license is needed whether or not the Core desktop will be logging into a server. The second thing that needs licensed is the server. The server license contains a client access license, or CALs. These CALs tell the server how many clients can log into it concurrently. With server CALs, there is only one kind. The server license provides them and tells the server the number of connections allowed. With client licenses, there are 4 options. First is the node-locked license. This license is locked directly to a client machine and can be used by only one person. If you have a power user who will be in Core most of the time every day, you may want this person to have a node-locked license. This will ensure that a license is always available for this power user. You can also choose a license on a USB key. Just plug the USB key into a computer before launching Core, and that computer will be licensed. A single license is connected to a single USB key. For teams that want a pool of licenses for which users can pick up a token, there are 2 options. The first and most simple option is the Enterprise License Manager, or ELM. The ELM is built into the Core server and is therefore the most simple of the 2 options. Because this license mechanism is built into the Core server, an end user must log in to the Core server in order to pick up a client license. If your team members will always be working in data on the Core server, you might want this option. If you have users that might not always want to log into the Core server to get their client license, then you may want to consider the Network License Manager, or NLM. The NLM is a separately installed software component. When using the NLM, a client license is picked up before logging into Core and can therefore be used whether you have a Core server or not. This is our most flexible license option. Core licensing works based upon a unique machine ID. It's important to note that this machine ID has nothing to do with the IP address or the MAC address of the computer. Instead, the license mechanism collects a variety of key characteristics of the computer, both hardware and software, then encodes these into a string. If any of those characteristics of your machine change, your machine ID changes. All Core licenses are enabled for a machine ID, and if the ID has changed, your Core license will no longer work. There's 2 points I'm trying to get at here. First, any computer you want to host a license is the one you'll need to use to send in the license request. That way the machine ID is associated appropriately. Once our team has the machine ID, we'll encode your new license with the machine ID from which you want to host it. Second is that from time to time, one of those characteristics may change. If that happens, you'll see an error message that indicates you have a license problem. These are quite simple to take care of. Just give me a call and I'll walk you through 1 or 2 quick troubleshooting steps Then, if needed, we'll get you a new license. If you're going to send me a license request, I should probably take a minute and show you how to do that. We have a license utility that makes this simple. You'll find this under the Start menu. Click Start, All Programs, Core 9.0 Server, Utilities, then License Utility. From there, you'll see one of these two screens, and you'll find it pretty intuitive. Click on Request on either one of these, whichever one you see. We've got Request at the top, then click Proceed. Then you'll see a second dialog. Fill out this form and click Submit. This will open your web browser where you have a few more fields to complete. Then submit the form through the browser. If for any reason you cannot use a web browser to send the request, maybe you're in a location that's not networked for security purposes, just click the Save Request button there in the middle. Save the file, then email that file to our support team. We'll reply as soon as possible with your license information in that email. The email that we send will contain complete instructions for the deployment of the license. Now, we've covered all of the front-end information, everything you'll need to know about installing and licensing your core server. Now let's dive in to some of the things you'll need to know for day-to-day operations. First up is the installation of service packs. We have a regular service pack rhythm that allows us to quickly deploy changes, fixes, and enhancements to our users. After a major release, the first service pack happens in just 30 days. After that, we do service packs every 45 days. In the event we have a low volume of non-critical fixes as we approach the time for service pack, we may choose to skip one. When this happens, we simply skip that release date and proceed to the next date on the calendar. Now, I'm assuming everybody watching this webinar is a core server administrator, so you might like to know in advance if there's a service pack coming. I do maintain a list of core server administrators and send emails to this list about upcoming releases about a week before the service pack goes out. Some of you may have gotten a personal invitation from me as a result of being on that list to come to the webinar today. If you're not sure if you're on the list, just send me an email and I'll make sure that you are, and we'll make sure you get those notifications. Now, a key concept with our service packs is that the core server, the core integrated desktop, and core to net, if you have it installed, all must have the same version and service pack all the time. If any one of these components are out of sync, then the components can't work together. The installation is pretty easy, so I'm not going to bore you with the details. Rather, I will point you to a document that we wrote that fully outlines the service pack installation for all of our core products. If you would like me to email this to you, just drop me a note and I'll send it out. Otherwise, you'll find it on our website. Just go to the support section, then click on documentation. The file is called Installing Core Service Packs. You may need to plan your service pack deployment in advance. This is especially a concern when your end users do not have permissions on their computers that are sufficient to install software. Our installers generally require administrative permissions, so you'll need to plan accordingly. And of course, before you install a service pack, you should do a big backup of your data, just in case. So let's go ahead and talk backups for a moment. I'm pretty crazy about protecting your data, and I found that I'm in good company when it comes to core server administrators. That's why when you install the core server, the default options will schedule backups. By default, backups will run at 11 p.m. local time, Monday through Friday. If you know you want to adjust this, you can do that during installation. The installation wizard will guide you through that. It's very intuitive. If you've already installed and want to change this, you can easily do so by adjusting the scheduled task. If you open up your task manager, you'll see a task called Hot Backup 90. Here you'll see a image of my task scheduler, and there's the task. You can just open that and edit it as desired. The scheduler will run a batch file at the designated time that will create a backup of your core repository. We call this a hot backup because this is done while the repository is live. Manually making a copy of the live repository in the core server can cause failure of the repository file. Not only do we not recommend you manually make copies of the repository files We strongly discourage you from doing so. Let me be clear. The Core 90 repository folder contains the live copy of your repository. You risk losing data if you choose to copy those files while the core server is running. Now you probably think I'm crazy because we both know that it's a best practice to copy your data to another location. You need to make backups, and we do still advise you to do that. So the hot backups are key here. These are going to go into the Core 90 backups folder. This is the folder you want to copy to another location. This folder is auto-maintained by the core server and will contain the last 7 days worth of backups from your core server. If you keep the contents of this backups folder synced to another location, you will have done all that is necessary. Now, a software developer that used to work here taught me that the best server admins are the ones that automate things. Not only does it make your life easier, but it causes the system to alert you when there's a problem. So we know that the core server makes a backup at 11 p.m. Monday through Friday. You might consider writing a utility that checks the date of the latest backup and alerts you if there's concern. Or maybe it checks every day and tells you the latest date. Whatever works for you. Every organization has its own IT policies and procedures, and we will do everything we can to answer your questions about backups. We know that protecting your data is of the utmost importance. Not only is it important to run backups and make sure that they exist, some organizations like to test the restoration of a backup from time to time, and we will fully support you in doing this. To restore a backup, you must take down your production environment. It is possible to do this while still preserving the production environment. If you would like to go through the process of restoring a backup for verification, just give me a call. We'll talk about the details of your situation, and I will send you custom step-by-step instructions. There's one more reason you might choose to restore a backup. On medium and large size installations, we recommend going through this process periodically to improve the performance of your core server. As with any system, the system can create a little bit of debris. Sometimes there's some blank spaces created, and the server gets less efficient when this happens in the repository files. So when you restore from a backup, all of that debris and all of those blank spaces are cleaned up. And this results in a smaller and therefore more efficient repository file. If you get to a point where you feel like the performance of your core server has declined, please give me a call. We'll talk about your situation, and I'll advise if I think restoring a backup for performance purposes is recommended. Administrative Tools is a utility within the core server that allows you to perform a variety of administrative functions. Instead of walking you through each one, I'll instead show you the utility and point you to a resource that will give you full details. Let's first show you how to open Administrative Tools. This does require that you log into the core server. Therefore, you will need both a client license and CALs. After you log in, you'll see a link to Administrative Tools on the home page. Alternatively, you can access it by clicking Tools, then Administrative Tools. Let's cover a few key areas. First, under Users and Groups, is the Sessions. This area allows you to see who is logged into the core server. This is helpful in the event you need to do any system maintenance that may impact the users. Simply look here to see if anyone is logged in. You may see entries that don't look familiar, such as GC user. This is just the system performing maintenance. Not only can we see who's logged into the server, but we can send messages and other commands. You'll find these commands by clicking Admin, then Server. Here you have commands to send a message to a user, to ask them to log out, force them to log out, to stop their session, to request that they close their project, to force their project to close, to log out all sessions, to close all projects, and to enable or disable logins. Now you'll notice in this list we see options to close a project and to close a session. When you close a project, the user is still logged into a session. If you want the person to be out of the core server entirely, you'll want to choose the Sessions command. If you use Coordinate, Administrative Tools also contains commands to start and stop the Coordinate server. To get full details on Administrative Tools, you can reference the Help menu. Just click Help, Help Contents. Then open the purple book on Administrative Tools. Our support team is here for you should you have any trouble. Still, there are a few things you can check before giving us a call. If an error message indicates that the client can't reach the server isn't responding, or the server isn't found, then you'll want to make sure that the server is running. There are two services that support the core server, Core 90 Net LDI and Core 90 Stone. Both of these services must be running in order for the core server to work. If you find either service is stopped, then try to start the service. If the service won't start, then reboot the machine and check the status again. And if that doesn't work, just give us a call and we'll take a look. Now there's one more key topic on core server administration, and this is setting up user accounts and permissions. And this topic is pretty big, so I separated it into its own webinar. We did that webinar about a month ago, so if you missed it, the recording is available online. It's not yet on our website. I just have a private link at the moment. So send me an email requesting the link, and I'll reply to you with that link right away. Katie, that completes all of the information I have today. Do we have questions?
We do have a few questions, and thank you so much for your presentation. Before we take any questions, I'd like to introduce Donna Long. Donna is a systems engineer with over 20 years of practical experience, both in systems engineering and in using Core. She's a member of our product management team here at Vitech and is the QA manager for Core. Welcome, Donna.
Thanks for having me.
And let's go ahead and move on to some of our questions. We've received a couple of really great ones. If you have any questions, go ahead and enter them into the question panel, into your webinar control panel there, and I will get them over to Bethany. The first question that we have is from Tim. Bethany, Tim is asking, can I manually start a hot backup?
You sure can. I have my server running here in the background, so why don't I get out of PowerPoint and show you how to do this. It's remarkably easy. We set this up to happen from the Start menu to make it really easy for you. So just click Start, All Programs, and find the Core 9.0 server folder. Now I mentioned this folder a few times during the webinar. So there's a variety of utilities here. We talked about some of the documents. There's your Core on a WAN. There's your license utility. But for the backup, you just need to click right there on Hot Backup. And if you watch this happen, it's going to run just a minute. That window's going to close, and the backup is done. And then we'll find that that backup has gone to the Core 90 Backups folder.
Now let me step in here for a minute, Bethany. That window will close when the backup is done.
That's right.
So if you have a large database, it will run for a while.
Yes.
Please do not close that.
That's right. I have seen backups on exceptionally large databases run for quite some time. And that's one of the reasons we schedule them to start overnight, so that it will ideally be done before your users come in the morning. Katie?
Right. Okay, so we've got one more question here, and it is from Andy, and he's asking, he says, you mentioned node-locked, USB, ELM, and NLM license types. Can I use a mix of these, or do I have to pick just one?
I'll take this one, Bethany.
Okay.
The licenses are unique and can be used in combination. As Bethany mentioned in the presentation, the most common one we find are the node lock for the power users, along with some pool ones, either NLM or ELM. Very infrequently will we find ELM and NLM running together, but you would always have node lock and USB for people who need them, and then one of the other two.
Right. It's more common to see users pick NLM or ELM.
Mm-hmm.
It's technically possible to run both, but you wouldn't want to have one user who's switching back and forth. Again, it can be done. It just wouldn't be a desirable situation, and it would be a little bit redundant. So most folks are choosing NLM or ELM based upon if they really want to enforce their users to be in the server all the time, or if they want to do what we do here, which is we only keep group data in our core server. So if I'm working on a project with Donna, it automatically, because there's more than one user, it goes straight to the server. But if there's something I'm working on in my own sandbox, I do that on my local machine. So we would use NLM here, just because of the way we choose to work. Katie?
Okay, thank you. I've got one more question here from Deborah. She's asking, for larger communities, do you recommend Core2Dat or NLM?
Well, hi, Deborah. It's good to have you here. For everybody else, Deborah is one of the core server administrators I've been working with for several years. She's a veteran, and she has a very large deployment. Deborah, Core2Net is great when you have offsite team members that are not power users. And the reason I say that caveat of not being a power user is because it is not a full client. You can do some things, but not everything. Maybe Donna can speak more to what it does or doesn't do, and give you a better idea there.
Core2Net is very lightweight. It allows you to see things but not manipulate diagrams per se. You can edit attributes, but you cannot create elements. So it's pretty much, we envision it more for those people who just need to view, not work with the data.
Mm-hmm. So, Deborah, I know a lot of your user community, still it's a very individual thing as to whether or not you would choose to deploy that in your environment, and we'd be happy to talk more with you about your users' individual needs. As far as NLM, now for everybody else having to know, Deborah does use NLM, and for me, the size of your deployment has little to nothing to do with whether or not you've chosen to use NLM. It really, for me, depends on whether or not you want to pick up the license before or after you log into the server. Now, picking it up after and using ELM is simple. There's less components, less trouble. But NLM provides flexibility. And because of that flexibility, it has become what I'm recommending more often than not. Katie?
All right, so that wraps up our questions for today. And if you have other questions that you think of later for Bethany or Donna, please don't hesitate to shoot customer support an email. You can see the email address on your screen now. And you could also post your questions or comments in the forum of our community site at community.vitechcorp.com. And so that wraps up our presentation for today. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Please be on the lookout for the next webinar that we're going to be scheduling in our customer exclusive series, as well as other webinars that we do as our educational line, and also some webinars that are going to be coming up to feature some of our new products. We're going to be adding things to the calendar probably a lot over the next couple of weeks. And I'm also going to chat out a link to our webinar calendar, which will have this information. At the conclusion of this webinar, a survey is going to open for you on your screen. Please take a moment for us to give us some feedback on today's presentation, or to let us know what kinds of topics you'd like to see covered in future webinars. And that's all for today, and thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.